Hello, friends, and welcome to Conversations with Consequences. We are the radio show and podcast of the Catholic Association, where we aim to change the culture one conversation at a time. You can listen to Conversations with Consequences on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. Eastern, or catch the encore at 5 p.m. We are also on Sirius XM Channel 130. Of course, our radio show is always a podcast. Go to thecatholicassociation.org/podcasts or directly to wherever you listen to your podcasts. Joining us next is Jessica Navin. She's the executive producer of a documentary called Radiating Joy, the Michelle Duppong documentary. And that will be showing in theaters across the United States on November 12th, 2024. I was able to watch it last night, and it was very moving, a very beautiful thing. And I'm really happy to have the executive producer on. Welcome, Jessica Navin.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So I'm privileged to have already watched this beautiful documentary. Why don't you tell our listeners about it, and who is Michelle Duppong, or who was she?
Well, Michelle Duppong is actually someone who I worked with in Focus for a little while. She was born in 1984. She was a Focus missionary from North Dakota. She worked for Focus for about 6 years and went home to work in evangelization in her home diocese of Bismarck, North Dakota. And she was diagnosed with cancer at the age of 30, and she suffered tremendously for a year. And then she passed away on Christmas Day at 31 years of age. And yes, after that, people started sharing stories about this remarkable deepening of faith that she went through in her year of suffering. She was already a very holy person dedicated to the Lord, but she went through such a transformation during this time of suffering that people started to wonder if she was a saint. And they started to pray for her intercession. And they told me and other people in Focus and in the Bismarck Diocese about favors that they had received when they asked for her prayers. And so on November 1st, 2022, Bishop Kagan of Bismarck opened the official cause of canonization for Michelle Duppong.
So someone that you knew very well and worked with in Focus, it might be one of our canonized saints in a few years. That's very exciting.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I can't begin to imagine. Although I've known people that I suspected died saints, but not with that official recognition. That's very beautiful. But let's take a step back. Here in our radio show, in our podcast, we've had Focus on a lot. We've had a missionary who's very close to my son, who's one of my sons in college, who's very involved with Focus on, and he gave us a beautiful rundown of what it's like to be a Focus missionary. We've had Curtis Martin on, who was the CEO and founder. But explain for our listeners who may not know about Focus. What is Focus, and how would a person like Michelle Duppong end up being a missionary in that organization?
So Focus stands for Fellowship of Catholic University Students, and we send young adults as missionaries to college campuses to evangelize the students. They start Bible studies, and they walk with students one-on-one in discipleship, and they share with them the joy of the gospel. They bring them closer to our Lord. And Focus has also expanded to parishes as well. So we send missionaries to parishes to evangelize those people who might be coming every once in a while on Sundays, but they don't really know our Lord yet. And so the goal of Focus is to bring people to the Lord and then teach them how to do the same thing for others.
So to be a Focus missionary is already a very intense giving over of one's life, right? To do this beautiful project of evangelization and to save souls. So Michelle was already a person before she received her diagnosis and started that year of suffering. She was already a person who had committed greatly to her faith, to God, to Our Lady, to the Church, to do everything she could to bring souls to God. So how did Michelle, before Focus, how did she get there? What was her life growing up, and how did she become a missionary?
Michelle grew up in a very devout family, and yet for many people who grow up in devout families, they can kind of make their faith almost a cultural thing, or they can kind of coast in their relationship with the Lord. Michelle was always seeking to grow in her spiritual life. The great desire of her life, even from when she was a teenager, was to become a saint. And Michelle's life was marked by a passion for saving souls. So even when she was in high school and younger, she wanted to bring more souls to Jesus. So in her college years, she was involved in the Newman Center at the University in Fargo. And then she encountered Focus missionaries, became involved with Focus, and decided that she wanted to dedicate the next few years of her life to reaching college students on Focus campuses.
So she went out and did what Focus missionaries do, right? She went to the campuses and set up Bible studies, lived with them probably in organized housing. Is that so?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So I'm very familiar with that. And I think it's so effective. Focus missionaries are so effective on campuses, and campuses can be very rough places for, especially I think young Catholic people who come from Catholic families and then go off by themselves to college and very often lose their faith in these environments.
Yes, they do. And there are stories of Michelle hunting students down if she saw them at Mass one day, or if she saw them at different events. She would follow them. She'd get to know them. And they said that she was so genuine in her desire to know other people that she actually was the instrument of conversion to Catholicism for several people who were not raised Catholic. And she was also the instrument of reversion for many students who were falling away from their Catholic faith in college.
So for all these years that Michelle worked, the 6 years in Focus, and then as the director of adult faith formation in Bismarck, North Dakota, for all these years, she saw herself as a conduit of souls to Christ, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. But then she got a diagnosis, and I understand, if I understood correctly from the documentary, that it was from the beginning a terminal diagnosis. And one that she knew would involve great suffering and pain.
Exactly. Yes. They recommended hospice care as soon as they diagnosed her, but they chose to do treatment. And this diagnosis, although that was a very uncertain time for Michelle, she was still completely focused on souls. At the treatment center where she lived for a while receiving treatment, she actually became a well-known figure at that center because she would make little paper origami things for the residents there. People started gathering in her hospital room so that they could share their troubles with her and ask her to pray for their intentions. Everybody wanted to be just a little piece of Michelle's story because of the love of Christ, which she still exuded. Even in the midst of her own suffering, she was always focused on loving the other people around her.
Michelle was someone who was on a very definite path and had great plans, enormous plans, I think, to bring souls to Christ and to the church. Do you think that this diagnosis was to her, it felt like at the beginning, a block in her plans, as though God was obstructing her, that she had years of souls to bring, but that God had given her a detour? Did she have trouble understanding?
I think that at times she did struggle with it, but there was always an emphasis on the fact that she isn't living her vocation and her mission in the future after she doesn't have cancer. She's living it right now. And so she just used the cancer to deepen her mission, and she offered up her suffering for the salvation of souls and that other people might be healed of cancer.
So that's a very holy way of experiencing suffering and illness and impending death. I think that's, for many saints, that's what distinguishes the holy person, is when they accept from the hand of God these things that to other people feel like tragedies, but that they are able to see possibilities, huge possibilities. Exactly. In something that God has given to them, something that maybe many people would be eager to reject out of hand. Exactly. Is that how she was? Is that something that she immediately jumped to, that holy acceptance of what God was putting on her?
I don't know if she immediately jumped to it, but that was very much a part of her spirituality at that time.
Mm-hmm. So then she took what many people would have taken with bitterness and rejection and anger, and she made something beautiful of it. I mean, this 1 year that she lived in terrible pain and suffering from the treatments themselves, I'm sure, and somehow was able to transform that with God's grace. Is that?
Exactly. Like the people around Michelle at that time, her doctors and family members and friends, said that they never heard her ask, why is God doing this to me? Why is this happening to me? But she just continued to unite herself to Jesus in her suffering.
That's so beautiful. In the documentary, you have firsthand accounts from people who knew her, who experienced her before and after her and during her illness. What were some of the accounts that you think are most impactful?
Well, I think one of the most impactful interviews for me in the documentary is the interview with her doctor, who was just meeting Michelle for the first time when she came for treatment. And he treated a lot of cancer patients. And I'm sure many of them were faithful Christians. And yet Michelle had a very deep impact on him. And he said that he actually would pray with her for her healing because she would lead the prayer. And that was not something that he was accustomed to doing in his own life.
So as a patient, she was a completely different experience for the doctor.
Exactly. And to this day, he still remembers her.
Yeah, he writes, he speaks very beautifully in the film of the impact that her life and death had on him. It must be very hard for doctors, and for anyone involved in the medical care, especially of people who are dying, but especially young people who are dying. It seems to us as limited human persons that to die young maybe is the greatest tragedy.
Yes. Well, and one of the very powerful interviews in the film that speaks into that is with Monsignor Richter, who was Michelle's spiritual director. And he points out in his interview that this cancer wasn't an accident. It was all geared towards Michelle's greater spiritual journey. God wanted her to have deeper union with Jesus through suffering. And that's how he saw Michelle's illness, and that's how she saw it.
So God's grace gave her that vision, right? That vision of the rightness of what God was making happen in her life.
Exactly. Without God's grace, she could not have reached that point.
And that's the kind of thing that must have been the kind of thing that she was able to transmit to the people who visited her and who took care of her and the other people in the treatment center and in the hospice where she died.
Yes. Actually, I remember speaking with a religious sister who visited Michelle right before she died. And this religious sister said that there was so much grace in Michelle's presence that walking into Michelle's presence felt to her like walking into a chapel.
Oh, how beautiful. Do you think that Michelle, if she becomes a saint, if she's canonized, I should say, that she may very well be a saint already, and if she is canonized, what kind of saint do you think? Like in what states of people, what kinds of people will be reaching out for Michelle? Will it be young people who want an active life of faith, with her, that kind of evangelization that she did in college, on the college campuses, or people who are facing death and want to do that holding hands with God?
That is a great question. There are so many people who Michelle's story is very applicable to. So first of all, like you mentioned, people who want to reach others in evangelization. Michelle is a great example of being a missionary disciple because she wasn't a great evangelist like maybe Fulton Sheen was. She didn't have a YouTube channel, but she reached out to other people in friendship. And that's something that we all can do. And so I think that ordinary people will be inspired by Michelle's example. And Michelle is a saint for the ordinary. She's not somebody like Padre Pio, who started having mystical visions of Jesus when he was 5 years old. She didn't found a religious order. She wasn't a martyr. And yet she attains extreme holiness. And so for those of us who feel like we haven't done anything big in our lives, the message is we still have the call to become great saints, and it's not beyond us. But I also think that Michelle speaks to anybody who has suffered with cancer or anyone who loves someone who is suffering with cancer. But also I want to point out Michelle could be, if she is a saint, which we don't know, but if she is or becomes one someday, she could be a saint for those struggling with infertility, because Michelle's greatest dream was to have a large family. And I remember seeing her right before she had her first major surgery, and she asked me to pray with her because the doctors didn't know if they would have to remove her womb or not before this surgery. And if they had to remove her womb, that means that she would not be able to bear her own children. And so I remember when we prayed together, we didn't pray, Lord, please make it so that they don't have to remove Michelle's womb. We prayed that she would have a lot of children. And then after this surgery, they did have to remove her womb. And that was one of her greatest crosses. But then after she died, a friend of mine had been trying to get pregnant for 5 years and wasn't able. And I encouraged her, why don't you try praying a novena to Michelle and see what happens? And she did, and she got pregnant during the novena. And so she then gave that novena to 2 of her friends who were struggling with fertility, and they also became pregnant. And then I gave it to several other people, and all of them now have babies.
So these are Michelle's children.
Exactly.
Oh,
God always
wonderful.
answers our prayers, and sometimes he answers them in a much bigger way than we intended in that moment. But he always hears us.
Her life speaks to me a lot about how we have this very limited view of the things that we are capable of in our lives. And the fact that maybe the greatest things we're capable of actually happen after we die.
Yes.
And we see this in the lives of many saints. I was thinking of specifically Saint Teresa of Lisieux and how she died so young and so hidden away in that tiny convent. And she achieved greatness after her death, a tremendous greatness. And I'm not even talking about all the churches that are dedicated to her and the altars and the feasts. Or her fame. I'm talking about her simple, that way of hers, which I'm sure has saved so many souls and has led to so many conversions and people really living closeness with our Lord through her little way. And this all happened after her death in a way that she could never have imagined. So all she had to do was to be faithful and to allow God's grace to fill her. And then God did all the rest of it. And so do you see Michelle like that?
I do. Michelle is a saint for the ordinary, just like Saint Teresa of Lisieux was, or she's a servant of God for the ordinary. And she is someone whose impact was felt during life, but now in a tremendous way is being felt after death.
And that's something all of us can hold on to, right? Sometimes we all suffer sometimes from that feeling that we're not doing enough, that our lives haven't been impactful like they should have been, that we haven't achieved those great goals. And I'm talking about noble goals. I don't mean driving the best car or or whatever those material goals are. I'm talking about spiritual goals.
Yes.
And I think for all of us, it's important to remember that our spiritual victories are not necessarily going to manifest themselves during our lives.
Right, exactly.
That's a beautiful thing to think about with Michelle and people like Michelle. The documentary was premiered during Focus's annual Seek conference this past January 2024. How was it received?
It was received with a very positive response. A lot of crying.
A lot of crying, I'm sure.
A lot of tissues. Mm-hmm. Yes, it was such a beautiful story, but we talked with people afterwards, and the room was packed. It was filled to capacity with almost 2,000 people, I believe. And there were people coming up to us afterwards saying how much it inspired them, including people who currently had cancer, saying that Michelle's story gave them hope.
Oh, that's so lovely. That's really wonderful to hear. And I'm hoping for great things from the screening. The screening will be across the United States on November 12th. And our listeners can get more information about the film and about those screening dates and hopefully future screening dates at focus.org/Michelle Duppong. Is that true? Did I get that right? Okay.
Yes. There's a link there where they can click on it to get tickets. And my hope is that with these November 12th screenings, I think that the thing that Michelle would want the most is that people not just go and watch her documentary, but that they go and they pray for those in their lives who need healing healing from cancer or just a conversion to Jesus. And so I'd encourage listeners not only to go to the screenings, but to turn them into opportunities for prayer.
Thank you so much, Jessica Navin. She's the executive producer of Radiating Joy, the Michelle Duppong documentary. As always, I'm so happy and excited to have our listeners on board, our loyal listeners that come back week after week by radio show or by podcast. And it's really a privilege to have you and an honor and a blessing to have listeners that enjoy this show. We try to do a wonderful job and find interesting topics that will make a difference in your lives and spark interesting and consequential conversations on Conversations with Consequences. I wrote a piece on something that is probably happening in your family these days. I write a monthly column for Angelus, which is the publication of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. It's a wonderful publication. It actually comes in paper. You can actually receive it in your mailbox. And these days, if I'm not looking at a screen, I'm really, really happy. I wrote a piece about what's going on in many of our families right now and among our close friends, which is the political division that comes with election season. I find that this year it has been almost as bad as last year. And the year before, things are, I'm not the first to say this or to think this, but things are more polarized. More than ever before. There's more anger. People are only listening and watching within their own ideological bubble, and we're having trouble communicating across those ideological divides. And that's really sad, because I think what unites us as Americans is so much more foundational and more important and more beautiful than the things that divide us. So I wrote this piece that came out 2 weeks ago, and it's called When Election Day Comes for My Family. Something dreadful this way comes. Can you feel it? Election Day is lumbering toward us, and you can just see its head and shoulders rising up against the horizon. Look for an amping up of dramatic hysteria in the lead up to that day, then a dreadful letdown for one half of the country, and gleeful schadenfreude for the other. And through it all, fury, recrimination, frustration, exasperation, misunderstandings, hard words, and hurt feelings, occurring not only between broad categories of Americans, but even between relatives of flesh and blood. The sad fact is that the fault line that runs quite evenly through American society also runs through many families with the same awful effects. It runs through ours, I'm sorry to say. Already we are experiencing strangely stilted Sunday dinners in which no one is bringing up any topics outside of the weather or how chubby the newest baby in the family has gotten. There are one or two at the table who are just one poke or jab from becoming entirely unhinged, and every one of us wants to avoid that worst of irate questions. Are you seriously considering voting for X? Reason and logic won't convince the other side that one set of policies is superior and will better effect the common good, or that the other party is pulling the wool over voters' eyes, promising sensible moderation but showing every sign of governing from the extreme fringe of elected. Charges of ignorance or willful blindness quickly devolve, we've found, into accusations of being unfeeling, uncharitable, careless of the poor, careless of the vulnerable. These accusations hurt a lot. I remember a time when it was different, when the stakes did not seem so existential, and when the disagreements were more political and less foundational. Perhaps things always look better in the rearview mirror, but I'm pretty sure that everyone used to agree on broad basics, that there was a kind of overarching narrative that we all accepted and that united us. I think it went something like this. Families were the bedrock of society, children were a blessing and inviolate, and the future. America made mistakes, but it was the greatest country on earth. Worshipping God was not only good for each individual, but indispensable to a virtuous citizenship. The legacy media employed real journalists who reported the facts instead of working to influence our thinking. The schools, whether public or private, taught only the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, plus history and pride of country. Free speech, like free association and religious freedom, were understood by all to be the indispensable ingredients of American flourishing. It seems that these previously unifying ideas are no longer held in common by both parties, or maybe we don't share a common language when talking about them. My free speech is my relative's misinformation, and his idea of family looks more like dysfunction and irresponsibility to me than that safe haven for babies and other vulnerable people that I call family. One angry relative tells me my unease about diversity, equity, and inclusion policies make me a racist. And I say that my children come in every color and race, and what I want for them is a colorblind society, which was Martin Luther King's great dream. Our greatest fracture line may be over the issue of abortion, which to me is the direct killing of the most defenseless human, and to my contenders a morally neutral act that ensures the flourishing of women. I think you can see why we stick to the weather and the chubbiness of babies. A few days ago, I called one of these people that I love and that I don't see eye to eye with. I reminded him that God gives us only a handful of years to enjoy each other's company. Soon I will be gone, and he will be gone. And I told him that I thought the personal should be kept free and clean from the political, because the personal is what makes our lives worth living. His smile at the side of my face is something I am loath to lose over an election, which in the end decides temporalities which mean so little against the great panorama of the eternal. That is the vista that matters, and the one that we are not meant to ruin by harsh words and harsher judgments. He took it well, in the spirit in which it was intended. He told me that my smile was important to him too, and that he wouldn't give that up for anything. We agreed to disagree and to love each other through this election and the next, as family does. Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences. I'm your hostess, Dr. Gracie Christie, and we have a really fun topic coming up next and a great guest. His name is Conor Gallagher. He's the CEO of 10 Books, and he's out with his own book himself. It's called The Well-Ordered Family, and he and his wife are the parents of 16 children. One of them just came home from the hospital, and the book is parenting tips. So who better than someone who has experienced it all and has managed it all beautifully, I'm sure, than Conor Gallagher to talk to us about the well-ordered family. Welcome to the show, Conor.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Christie. I appreciate it.
What a wonderful topic. You know, on our show, we cover very often the demographic collapse of the West and the way that people's everybody's idea of what a beautiful life is that used to always include children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and one was so fortunate as to meet one's great-grandchildren, that has sort of fled, and very few people are having children at all. And I'm an outlier at 5, but you're a super outlier at 16. So it would be wonderful to hear about your book and what a well-ordered family looks like, because I think what ends up, and we can talk about this, and I'd love your opinion on this, one of the things that people are eschewing when they refuse to have children or only have one or two is they are saying no to chaos, maybe, or what they think might be a chaotic household if many children are there. I don't find that to be so, but what do you think? Is this something that people are afraid of? Chaos?
Yeah, they really are. And the thing is, you know, it seems impossible that the more kids you have, the easier it gets. That sounds impossible. And I mean, I'm not going to pretend like that's the case in every situation. You know, 5 kids has challenges that one doesn't. But I mean, I look at families with 1 or 2 little kids, and they don't have older kids to help out with the younger ones.
Exactly.
They don't have built-in playmates for the kids. And so what happens?
They don't have built-in babysitters after a certain amount of time, right?
That's right. I always tell people, like, when that oldest kid is about 13, you've sort of reached the promised land because you and your spouse can go out to dinner now and have a built-in babysitter. I mean, it was so many years where, you know, I had no money. I was early in my career, had not succeeded at business yet. And we had a bunch of little kids, 5 or 6 little kids under the age of 8 or 9 or 10 or whatever it was. My wife knows all those numbers, but it was chaotic. And I didn't have money to take my wife out to dinner, let alone pay some babysitter, you know? And so it was really hard. So I always tell people, you got to push through to where that older kid is about 13 or so, to where they can pretty easily, you know, babysit so you and your spouse can go out. And then the oldest hits 16 and they can drive to the grocery store for you. Like
you've made it. You've come into your own.
You got it. So, it's funny talking about the number of kids, and I mean, this program, by the way, the Welder Family Management System, which I've created, it's not for just big families. That is not the point. It's for any size family. In fact, an engaged couple with no kids could be implementing much of this to prepare their marriage. So I don't want your listeners to think this is just for big families. It is not. But you do learn a few things with a whole bunch of kids and a whole bunch of businesses.
And maybe if you institute some of these techniques while your family is small, then you're able to grow your family. Because one thing I see in families with few children is they don't know how to manage time because there's maybe two parents and one child, or two parents and two children, and things are too intense and too complicated. Like, they make life very complicated for themselves around their children. And then they can't see that if you add more children, then you decomplicate yourself, right? Like you're forced to create a sense of order at home, which we're going to talk about with you because you're going to tell us the steps towards that. But you're forced to create order. And then as your family grows, it grows in a very satisfactory way.
Yeah. So I relate this whole thing whenever I'm talking about this. I relate it to business because that's my story, right? So you start with a small business. There's actually a famous business book called The E-Myth, which stands for the entrepreneurial myth. And the myth that an entrepreneur goes through is they think they have to do everything themselves. They have to do the sales and marketing. They have to do the accounting. They have to take care of the customers, et cetera, et cetera. And a business, if you're going to develop into a true business executive, you got to learn to delegate. And so the more business you have, as it grows, you have more employees. What that does is it forces you to step out of just that entrepreneurial startup mode and become a true executive with a self-managing company. So I relate that, Doctor, back to family life. And as I had more and more kids, I was seeing my businesses, which I was growing, were succeeding, making money. Efficiency was kicking in. I was delegating. People had clear roles and responsibilities. I had a clear vision written on paper, hanging on the wall, got my team aligned around that wall. I had meetings to keep everybody aligned. I had metrics and goals and all these things I was aiming to get. I had a scorecard for marketing and inventory control and all these things that a good business person has to do. And then I would go home and it was kind of chaotic. Now, my wife's like superwoman, but it was just chaotic with 8, 9, 10 kids. So eventually one day I said, honey, I think we need to bring some business efficiency in here because I can't walk into my office and tell people randomly what to do every day. There has to be an overarching system. And so she was like, all right, Mr. Business, why don't you come in here and show me how to do it?
That's exactly what I say to my husband when he makes big suggestions.
Yeah. So we did. I was like, okay, by golly, let's try to do it. And so I kind of put on my business hat for the first time. I brought out a big whiteboard, sticky notes, markers, all the kind of little tools I get for like running a big business meeting. And I did this with the house, and we came up with our first chore chart, and we came up with some quarterly goals for what we wanted to try to accomplish as a family over the next 90 days. And I said, there's something to this. And it slowly built from there. And I developed my 6-part family management system, all steeped in the tried and true principles that make businesses tick every single day.
I want to talk to you about the 6 parts, and they're fascinating. But you said something very interesting. You talked about delegating, and the entrepreneurial person wants to have their finger in every pie and wants to micromanage every single piece of what's going on. And that's the small business and the entrepreneur. And in a family, maybe in a chaotic family, I see parents making that mistake. They want to micromanage the children's time. They want to make sure they're involved in every decision. And then what ends up happening is that responsibility is not delegated to the child as the child grows, and chaos is the result. And internal chaos for the child, but also for the entire family.
I love it.
Is that fair?
100% bingo, bullseye. You nailed it. You got it. Now, let me tell a little story about that. And people find this funny. I thought it was pretty hilarious, but this was years ago. I think we had 6, 7, 8 kids. I can't remember. I always lose how many kids we had at any given time. But we had some friends over who had 1 or 2 little kids. And I think it was our 2-year-old that came up and asked if they could have a little cup of yogurt. And we said, Ashley and I, my wife, we said, oh, sure, go ahead. And so they went and they pulled the stool from the countertop. They pulled the stool over to the refrigerator. They climbed up on it. They opened the refrigerator. They got the yogurt out. They closed it. They went over to the drawer. They pulled the stool over to the drawer. Yeah, a 2-year-old. They got the spoon. They took the top off the yogurt. They threw the trash can. Then they went and sat at the table and they ate their yogurt. And our friends who had, their oldest was 2, and this was probably like our 8th kid or something. But their oldest, who was 2, is, of course, they're babied because it's the first kid. And they thought our kid was a walking genius. And I'm sitting there saying, no, it's just survival. That's what they have to do. And I said, look, we spoiled our oldest. You're going to spoil your oldest. But look what a 2-year-old can do. Make them do it. Like, make them start to take care of themselves. And as you have more kids, that nature does that for you. So, and then we build systems, through my business to help you enable your children to become more independent. Because you're right. When the kids are really young and you only have a couple, mom and dad do all the work for them. We always laugh when we see a young couple out with one child and it takes like 2 parents to put on the jacket of one kid.
You know what I love seeing? And I'm sorry, it's a little mean of me. I love seeing the young couple with one child and they take turns taking care of the child. And I'm thinking,
I know. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, if you think that can continue for a few more years and 3 or 4 more children, you have a rethink coming, because and I think, you don't have to take turns taking care of the child. You can put it down.
No, but you and I do it. We would do the same thing, and we did the same thing. And
we did do the same thing.
Yeah, and I've seen even when my wife and I, on the rare occasion, we'll take out like one of our little kids, just us, and we've joked. I promise, we've joked. We've been like, we're doing what new parents do. Like we're feeding this kid and taking care, doing all this stuff the way brand new parents do. Of course you do that. You do that because you love your kid.
I took my 15-year-old son to the March for Life one year, some years ago. He's the oldest, and we were out in Washington D.C. by ourselves and going to the march. And I asked him if he was hungry like 6 times. He was a growing boy. Right. And then finally he looked at me. He stopped. He looked at me. He goes, "Mom, you haven't asked me if I'm hungry in like 12 years." He goes, "You're freaking me out. Who are you?"
Yeah. That's normal.
It was a good salutary experience for him, being asked if he was hungry. He always found the food. You know how growing boys are, I'm sure. At least half of your children must be boys.
I got 8 boys, 8 girls. And by the way, I got 2 grandkids now, which is, that's just weird. It's not so weird that I'm a granddad. But when I look at my young, beautiful, in shape, fitness, amazing woman wife, and I'm like, she's a grandma? that really freaks me out a little bit.
We gotta clip that out and send it to your wife as a little present. We're gonna do that. I'm gonna make sure we do that. Okay, so Conor,
we're fighting over the grandparent names, by the way, right now, because the grandkids are just like infants. Aww. But we got 2 of them, and I cannot decide, or it's her choice, but I can't seem to agree with one of these stupid grandma names that everyone has, because she just looks too young to be like Meemaw or Nana. Like, I don't want that. I want something a little bit more cool, but we can't seem to agree on it.
We're doing the same thing. We have our first grandchild was born 6 months ago, and I want to be abuelita, which means my little old grandmother in Spanish. And my husband is like, I don't know if I want to be married to an abuelita. You don't look like an abuelita. So,
well, you see, because I don't know any Spanish, that sounds pretty cool to me. So I might recommend it to
I think Mima sounds great. So maybe we'll switch. You recommend to your wife, and I'll take Mima.
All right. Sounds good.
So let's talk about your system. And there's 6 components to it. And the first one is, which I think is amazing. I love this. The first one is vision. So tell us, what is a vision for a family?
All right. So vision is, traditionally, the word vision does not mean sight, right? So you can see your computer, you can see your cell phone. But vision is seeing that which is not there, like a visionary. So I'm a publisher of TAN. And so think about those mystics, the people who see apparitions. They're visionaries. And I love that word. And now a lot of CEOs are taking on that term at work, because it shows their job is to envision, to creatively imagine the future state of their organization and what it can become. And that takes a creative soul. So I identify with that. That's what I love to do. And that's been my success in business. So at home, I think the families need a visionary. And I'm not saying it has to be dad or it has to be mom. It's definitely a joint venture there. Now, my wife, who's not the creative type, she's more science-based. She's like, yeah, you're a visionary. Okay, that works for us. But, it's still a shared responsibility, no doubt about that. So we together are envisioning what our family should be in 10 years from today and 20 years from today. So what I need people to do, just like you do in business, is go write a vision statement for your family. And what is the purpose of God creating this family? Why did God bring you and your spouse together and give you these very specific kids? And we just had our 16th, little Monica Agnes. And I was thinking to myself after she was born, what is the purpose of God giving me this particular child versus any other particular child? There's something unique in that relationship that I have with her, and it's different from the 15 other kids. So I have tools. I created worksheets. I call them tools. They're all available on wellorderedfamily.com for free. But I have tools that help you shape the vision for your family. This includes, you can have core values like we do in business. I call them core virtues because I think that's a little bit more objective. A patron saint. You can have a patron saint for your family. A beatitude for a beatitude for your family. Do a SWOT analysis on your family to kind of jumpstart this whole thing. Strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Businesses use that.
Oh, my consulting son uses that all the time. I didn't know what it meant.
Yeah, SWOT. And so why do we do that in business but not at home? And so I have this ultimate document, and it's pretty awesome. And it's called the Family Master Plan. And it has everything I just mentioned and more on one page, one front page piece of paper. And what that does is over time, you're shaping these big picture items for your family so that when you make little decisions each and every day, you're making them in light of your ultimate objectives. And so our business helps you shape that. We have coaching services that will help you shape that over time. I have a video series that kind of helps you shape that. So that's an example, one small example of what the vision component is of the 6-part system.
The vision component leads to the second one, I think, which is unity, right? Because it's a shared vision. But I have to tell you, Conor, we only have 1 minute left, so we can't go into it, but I want to mention the other parts, which is unity, systems, metrics, relationships, and discernment. I just want our listeners to get a gestalt view of it so they understand. I can't think of anything in this world where family life has cratered on so many levels, but even to the point where people aren't forming families. I can't think of anything more important than the tools. And as you say, to start implementing those in the beginning of one's marital relationship so that you have the ability to form a family and welcome children into the world and hopefully many children into the world as you have done.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's perfect that we only spoke about part 1 because that's the foundation. We don't need to talk about the other parts. People can come to Well-Ordered Family. We have an assessment test. And you can see where your strengths and weaknesses are for each of these 6 parts. It's really fun. Everyone likes assessment tests. I created one just for your family. So you do that, and then you can talk to one of our coaches for free consultation about why are we strong in some and weak in others. And we can help you kind of, get a little bit better at each of these things. So
to our listeners, that's the wellorderedfamily.com. The book is also called Well Ordered Family, and Conor Gallagher is the CEO of 10 Books and the proud dad of 16 children and doing a wonderful work helping other people have well-ordered families. So thank you, Conor.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Every morning, the Catholic Association reviews all the latest news and sends our subscribers a carefully curated collection of the most important news of the day. Items are specifically selected for a smart Catholic audience like you. Don't let the world take you by surprise. Subscribe to our daily media roundup at thecatholicassociation.org. And now, Father Roger Landry offers us, as is customary, a short and inspiring homily to prepare us for this Sunday's Gospel.
This is Father Roger Landry, and it's a privilege for me to be with you. So we enter into the consequential conversation the risen Lord Jesus wants to have with each of us this Sunday, when we will eavesdrop on the dialogue Jesus has with the apostles James and John, and then with all of the other apostles on the subject of ambition. The brothers James and John, with great chutzpah, asked Jesus for a blank check. Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. Jesus indulges them by asking, what do you wish for me to do for you? And they reply, Grant that in your glory we may sit, one at your right and the other at your left. The two fishermen wanted to be the Messiah's right and left-hand men, his two viceroys or executive VPs, in what they anticipated would be Jesus' glorious messianic reign. But Jesus responded, "You do not know what you are asking." And then he gave them yet another indication of the expectation-shattering type of kingdom he would be establishing. Can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am to be baptized? Alluding to the cup of suffering prophesied by Isaiah and the cleansing ablution of blood that would take place on Good Friday. To his question, the brothers impetuously respond, "We can." Jesus then foretold that they ultimately would drink that cup of suffering, but reminded them that God the Father had already prepared those who would sit on his right and his left, which would be the good and the bad thief on Calvary, the sheep and the goats at the general judgment, and likely, dynamically, Mary and Joseph in heaven. Here in this conversation, however, the other 10 apostles objected and became angry at James and John, not because of the brothers' impudence, but out of jealousy. They themselves wanted the positions that the brothers had the guts to ask for. Their anger gave Jesus the opportunity to give one of the most important instructions to them and to the whole church about the path of greatness, about the means to become like Jesus, about the way to reign with him and advance his kingdom. We need to focus carefully and persistently on what Jesus says, because it goes so contrary to many of our worldly ways. 4 weeks ago, as you may recall, we had an opportunity to focus on ambition and the path to greatness in God's kingdom. The theme is a common one in St. Mark's Gospel because the apostles were so obsessed about which of them would be the greatest, and the voracious egocentric hunger came to the surface at least 4 times, all disgustingly when Jesus spoke about how he would suffer, be betrayed, and crucified to establish his kingdom. We spoke then about how Jesus didn't seek to suppress their ambition, but to reorient it, pushing them to become great in faith, great in humility, great in holiness, great in knowing and transmitting the faith by word and example, and great in sacrificial love. This Sunday we focus with Jesus on this last Christian ambition. Jesus tells the apostles in this Sunday's gospel, "You know that those who are recognized as rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones make their authority over them felt." It's still the same way today. Greatness is determined by how much power one wields in politics, how much money or influence one has in business, how many magazine covers and social media followers one has in entertainment. Greatness is determined by the capacity to command or lead others from above. Jesus says that in his kingdom, however, it can't be that way. Whoever wishes to be great among you, he says emphatically, will be your servant. Whoever wishes to be first among you will be the slave of all. In his kingdom, those who are great would lead in love from below, from serving, from sacrificing, from even dying for others. Then he gives the reason. For the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus was calling them not to lord it over others, but under others. To be great, in other words, would come not principally through sharing Christ's power, but through sharing his love. Jesus Christ would put these words about serving others rather than being served into action during the celebration of the Last Supper on the night he would be betrayed. When he stood up, took off his outer garment, tied a towel around his waist, and began to wash the filth off his disciples' feet, a menial task normally done by servants and slaves. The apostles naturally resisted Jesus debasing himself in this way. But after he was finished, Jesus said, "Do you know what I've done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that's what I am. So if I, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I've set you an example that you should do as I have done to you." Real greatness in Christ's kingdom would be determined not by fighting for seats at table, but for fighting for the towel. The highest would not be the one to whom others would lift glasses and toasts, but the one who would be able to drink the cup of Christ's blood and in turn say to others with Christ, "This is my blood shed for you." Christ's cabinet would be filled not by those who would kiss his butt, but by those who would put their own butts on the line for him and for others, by being baptized into Christ's death through their own suffering and death. The greatness to which Jesus wants us to aspire, therefore, has nothing to do with any type of terrestrial pecking order. Real greatness, he described, is to become most like him, to share in his form of greatness, in his holiness, in his total self-giving love. 20 times in the gospel, Jesus told his disciples, "Follow me." And in this Sunday's gospel, Jesus was telling us that the path to greatness is to do what he himself was doing. For the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. St. Paul would later describe to the Christians in Philippi that Christ's example was the stairway to heavenly exaltation. "Do nothing," he said, from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you not look to your own interest, but to the interest of others. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, didn't deem equality with God something to be exploited, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness, and being found in human form, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. This self-abasing, loving service is the root of Christ's greatness. John and James and the other apostles were chosen by Jesus because even though at first they had very human and selfish desires and motivations, they were capable of conversion so that Jesus' categories would eventually become their own. Once they saw the fulfillment of Jesus' teaching in his suffering, death, and resurrection, they experienced a real moral metamorphosis, a total transformation of their worldly ambition into Christ-like ambition. This was obviously not an easy conversion, but 11 of the 12 of them eventually made it. They went from obsessing about themselves to giving their lives to bring Christ and his saving gospel to the ends of the earth. They gave their lives, like Christ did, to ransom and rescue the lives of many others from a life lived without God, one often lived in darkness, in order to bring them out of darkness to live as true children of the light. The Lord would like us to experience a similar transformation, from a focus on ourselves, from seeking to live by worldly categories of success and greatness, to living according to his own categories, and seeking to help others to experience that same liberation. One of the most important litmus tests as to whether we are living that metamorphosis is our attitude to serving others, and not just in general, but like Jesus and like the converted apostles, by seeking to bring others to salvation. Jesus came to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many, to give his body and shed his blood in order to redeem them. He wants us to become great by dedicating our lives similarly to spreading the news and means of salvation. This Sunday is World Mission Sunday, when the church throughout the globe focuses on how each of us and the church as a whole is summoned by Christ to complete his saving work, go into the whole world, proclaiming the gospel to every creature, baptizing and teaching them everything Christ has commanded us. As several recent popes, including Pope Francis, have reminded us, the church and each of us do not just have a mission, but are a mission. Our whole Christian existence is tied to the saving mission of Christ, just as much as the lives of the first apostles. Some members of the church are going to be on the front line, like the apostles originally, and like missionary, priests, religious, and lay people today. But everyone in the church has a role in the missions, through prayer, sacrifice, and generosity for those on the front lines, and through basic witness closer to home. No Christian exists to be served. Every one of us exists to serve in imitation of Christ and to spend our life to ransom others and lead them on the way to salvation. As the new National Director of the Pontifical Mission Societies, I thank you in advance for your prayers for the Church's missions throughout the world this Sunday, for whatever you can generously give to help us help those in the 1,100 missionary territories around the world we support in spreading the gospel and in building churches, Catholic schools, seminaries, and convents to help young Christian communities grow and become strong. The Lord calls us to be great, becoming the servant of the rest. The greatest means Jesus gives us to help us to become great in this way occurs at Mass. Jesus humbly bent down at the beginning of the Last Supper to wash his apostles' feet. He was just getting started. Later he would abase himself even further, changing bread and wine into his body and blood so that we as servants could consume him and live off him. This is the chalice he places before us to drink, to which he hopes we will respond with as much trust and zeal as John and James did. Jesus, in giving himself in ransom for us in the Eucharist, wants us to make that type of love the path of our life. He simplifies everything he's taught us about the way to true greatness in the words he'll say to us again this Sunday: do this in memory of me. The Eucharist is the source of the Church's mission in every age. Let us receive Jesus and let him transform us from the inside so that we might complete his saving task together. God bless you.
Thank you so much for another exceptional homily, Father Landry. To check out more from Father Roger Landry, make sure to read all of his writings at the National Catholic Register at ncregister.com, and you can listen to his homilies at catholincpreaching.com. We hope to have you back next week, and until then, you go with our prayers.